Okay. Well, first of all, it's great to see you all, and welcome to our class of 60 Intergenerational Forum on Growing Wealth Inequality. We're going to focus on three main questions. The first is the dimensions of the problem, and we have Ben Stern, class of 20, and recent summa cum laude graduate, and Zach Lytle, class of 21, who will divide 10 minutes to talk about that to get us started. The second question is the impact of all this, and we're fortunate to have our own Elise Landau take that on. She's a teacher, social worker, community and hospital practice, and social practice, private practice. And then the third question is, what can we do about all of it? And our own instigator of the forum, Mike Westgate, who had a career in community and economic development, will take that on to get us started. I hope we'll have as much as an hour for a full Q&A, at the end of which Ben Berger will take 10 minutes to wrap up. Ben Berger, in addition to being a professor of political science, is director of the Lang Center on Civic and Social Responsibility at the college. So each of the panelists will have 10 minutes. Zach and Ben will have to divide the 10 minutes, and we'll do all of those first, and then we'll go to discussion. So let's get started. Ben and Zach, are you ready?
I'm ready, yes.
You're on.
So Zach and I are going to go through some of these graphs in the packet, just as a background on the current state of inequality and trends in inequality over the last 60 years that inform how we've gotten to where we are today. These graphs are in the third attachment. If anybody wants to follow along, they're about 12 or 13, but we're just going to discuss the first 6 now, just because we only have 10 minutes, and those are kind of a good background, and then the rest of them we can use in our discussion or in our Q&A later. So now Zach will get started with this graph right on this second page.
Yeah, so the first thing we kind of wanted to establish is what's just been happening trend-wise. And this first graph kind of just shows you that we've been seeing over time a trend that has been having the top 1% grow their wealth at the cost of other groups. So percentile-wise, the top 1%, in particular the top 0.1%, have seen large growths in their percentage control over the U.S. wealth, at the cost of other groups, especially the bottom 50% have seen a lot of losses. So if we move on to figure 2, what you see in this graph is that this trend, if you move from percentile to just like dollar amounts, for a while, even though wealth inequality was increasing, everyone was still seeing overall growth in their wealth. So between 1983 and 2001, even though the middle and lower class were owning a smaller percentage of US wealth, their wealth was still growing over time. However, in the last 20 years, and especially the Great Recession was a large player in this, we've seen all the wealth gains of the last 30, 40 years erased with no recovery. So now the lower class of America has less wealth than they did in 1983 and before. So moving on to the third figure, this third figure is kind of starts to get into what some people consider the very structural reasons that this is occurring. This graph is pulled from Piketty's work, Capital in the 21st Century, and basically the idea is the black line is graphing the return on capital, and the white squares are graphing the growth rate of the world. And basically the idea is that if your growth rate of capital is greater than the growth rate of the economy, income inequality will be inevitable unless you have strong redistributive measures. And there was a small period in time that kind of informed all of our minds from about 1940 to about 1980, where actually the growth rate of the world economy was greater than the return on capital. And during that period, you wouldn't see inevitable wealth inequality growing because the economy is growing so fast that wealth can't reproduce itself. But however, what this graph is trying to show is that that actually might be a historical anomaly where most of human history, the return on capital has been higher than the growth rate. And so that we should expect without intervention there to be structural inequality that's always growing. And so that's the kind of the framing of what's happening right now. And after that, what we're going to have is Ben talk about a lot of the different, more specific ways this is affecting along race and gender and class lines, and then also other policy decisions the U.S. has made that impacted this.
So this next graph, this is slide number 4. So now we can kind of start to look at some of the root causes as well as trends of inequality. Over the last 70 years, the tax structure has changed pretty drastically. So this image here is from a really good New York Times article that described the changes in total tax rates since 1960. And this is just a pulled image here of the tax rates at 1950 to today. So the black line is the total tax rates at each income level in 1950. And the yellow line is the total tax rates for each income group as of 2018. So these total tax rates include all federal, state, and local taxes. Oops. So in 1950, the wealthiest Americans paid a total tax rate, so their average effective tax rate of 70%. This was about the wealthiest 400 Americans in the country. And today, that absolute wealthiest share pays the lowest total tax rate of any of these income groups, at just 23%. And this total tax rate curve is basically completely flattened and then even dips off lower for the wealthiest Americans. And there are a lot of different changes in the tax code that led to this. But primarily it's because taxes that disproportionately affect the rich, like capital gains tax, estate tax, corporate taxes, have fallen drastically since the 1960s and really starting in the 1970s, where income taxes have gone back and forth a bit, but have decreased for the wealthy and about stayed the same for most Americans, whereas payroll taxes have increased pretty dramatically since 1960, which disproportionately affect middle and low income workers because of caps on taxable income. And then additionally, a whole industry of tax avoidance has emerged over the last few decades, allowing wealthy people and corporations to hire advisors and consultants to help take advantage of tax loopholes in order to lower their total taxes paid. The overall effect of these changes in the tax code is that over the last 70 years, the net American tax code has shifted from being quite progressive to quite regressive and much less redistributional. So these next two graphs now look more closely at the trends in inequality across different demographic groups of Americans. The US has a very long history of different racist power structures that have persisted throughout the entirety of the United States' existence. And today, the median white American has roughly 10 times more net worth than the median Black American and 8 times more than the median Hispanic American. Median Black and Hispanic worth has actually fallen over the last 20 years, and the gap in net worth between white Americans and people of color is growing increasingly. And since the Great Recession, white net worth has begun to increase again, but it has completely stagnated or even fallen for Black and Hispanic Americans. And then even among Black, Hispanic, and white Americans with the same incomes, the racial gap persists. And this gap, interestingly, actually increases with higher income groups. So the top 10% of white Americans hold 20 times more wealth than the top 10% of Black Americans. So this next image is similar, but looks at differences across race and gender. So this is from an analysis in 2015. And as of then, white men had a median wealth of $30,000, while white women have a median wealth of about $15,000. whereas median Black male wealth is only about $300, while Black women have a median wealth of $200 or even negative by some of these measures. And similarly, Latino Americans have a median male wealth of around $1,000 and median female wealth at $100 or even slightly negative. And
Benjamin,
Black and Latino, sorry, what was that?
Could you put the slides in show mode? These are too small to be resolved.
Let's see. What are you seeing right now?
I'm seeing your speaker prep version of the slides rather than just the slide. So everything is too small to be read.
I see. Let's try one more time.
There was a view option at the top. You could make it 200 or 300%, but then it was hard to read.
Yeah. Let me try.
I would point out that all of these slides were in the packet that John sent out a week ago.
Yeah.
Let's see one more time.
In fact, it's also, I want to point out, it's also the case. Well, it's much better if you can still see your notes too, but it's also in the email. It was an invite that I had sent out. It also contained links to those files too. So if anybody wanted to follow along, they could do that by pulling up those files attached to the invitation. That's the problem, Ben. It's when you do it in that mode is better.
And this mode right now?
That I think, isn't that right? To anyone who's having difficulty before, is this not better in terms of being able to see?
Much better.
Yes.
And you
Great.
can see the cursor moving, which helps when he points out things.
Can everyone see the bottom of this slide? Because mine's cut off.
No, I think all that's cut off are the notes. That's what Ben is.
That's fine. Yeah.
I don't think you
Good
need
to me.
Ben is using those to orate. And by the way, I'm going to take less than 10 minutes at the end, so you should feel fine about taking the time you need for this. My wrap up is the least important thing. I think this and the discussion is by far the most important thing that there is.
Have the past two slides also been that small too? Do people want me to go back to those?
No, they were clear enough. They were clear enough to me anyhow. And Patricia.
Okay. Well, I think it's fine as long as people can see now. I don't really need the rest of the notes for this anyway. I mean, this slide pretty much speaks for itself in just showing how drastic the discrepancies are in median wealth for Black, Latino, and white Americans. That's really the point of this slide. I mean, compared to like on this graph, you pretty much can't even see female Black wealth because it is only about $200 compared to both white women and white men. So interestingly, the differences in wealth across gender actually increase both as you move up income brackets, as well as are much more dramatic for white Americans. So while women of all races and ethnicities have both higher educational levels, but then lower incomes and wealth than men overall, their socioeconomic status is a lot closer to men within their racial or ethnic group than women across or racial ethnic groups. And you can see that pretty well on this slide.
Oh, wait, folks, I'm sorry, Ben, 1 second. In the chat section, I just put the file there as a PDF that Ben that was shared along with the packet. So if you want to open that on your computer, you're welcome to. And that'll show you in full size what Ben is going through right now too, your choice.
Okay, well, we were only, when we spoke with John, we were only going to present on these first 6 graphs anyway, and then the rest of them we were going to just use for discussion. So I think as long as everyone has got a good look about these 6 graphs and doesn't have any questions or anything, I think we could probably move on as long as that sounds okay.
And for the purpose of discussion, again, in the chat section, there is a PDF that anybody can access there that's got the slides that Ben and Zach were just talking about.
Before we move on, would anyone like to just quickly see any of these 6 slides again?
I'm I have a question about the one about the tax rate, where the bottom line is the one that ends 2018 and the top is 1950. I'm a little puzzled about the years that is covering, since there are two different conclusions there.
Yes. So what this graph is a little bit confusing because it was pulled from an interactive graph, which I can actually just pull up right now if people would like to see it. But what this, so the black line is the total effective tax rates for Americans in 1950. So in the bottom left corner, the black line is that for the poorest Americans in 1950, they were paying a total tax rate of about 12%, while increasing to the right, this is for higher income groups. So the wealthiest Americans, which is over in the right side, in 1950 were paying 70% a total effective average tax rate, while the yellow line is those same breakdowns by income, but in 2018. Does that make more sense?
Not really, but
yeah, it does.
Good. You can explain it to me later, Elise.
Maybe we need to move along a little bit.
Sure.
And have plenty of Q&A later.
Wealthy whites are paying 23%.
To answer Sue's question?
No, that's okay.
The central point of this question is that
I think the wealthiest people.
You said white.
Well, because they are all the top 1%.
To answer Sue's question, this is not year by year. This is a snapshot in 1950 across from bottom 10% to top 90%. And then the yellow is all in 2015, whatever it is. 2018. And so that's all in 1 year.
I see.
I'd like to point out that the right-hand portion of the screen is not the top 10%. The very last one is the top 400 people. The next one is the top 1/10 of 1%. And the next one is, I believe, the top 1%. So you're focusing on the very wealthiest Americans in that group.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay, so I think we should move on then.
Please.
Okay, well, I guess that's me.
Are you got Ben and Zach? Are you guys finished?
Yes, yep. I think so. Yes, we were only going to talk through those 6 graphs for now, and we could come back to them later, the rest of them in the Q&A.
Okay, Elise, you're on.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, everybody. Professor Berger and Ben and Zach, you've just been incredible and wonderful to be with us and to do such great work and present it to us. I really appreciate it. We all do, speaking for everybody. And to Michael, who thought this out and organized it all, and John and Peter and Mary Lynn, who helped out so much. I just want to say thanks a lot. Okay, moving right along. If you thought that was depressing, well, just wait. I'm going to focus on a couple of books that just came out recently, which people I'm sure are pretty aware of by now. And these focus on how the working class in America has really been hollowed out. I mean, parts of the country, you might say, have been hollowed out because the kinds of jobs, if any, that are available are so poor and poorly paid. The loss of manufacturing jobs, the switch from a goods to a service economy, offshoring and automation. These are all things that have contributed to making, actually, in terms of education, BA just about a necessity for a middle class life. It's interesting that in the political arena, what we're seeing is that the working class is now called the middle class, but I'm calling it the working class for the purpose of our discussion. Okay, now, I just want to share with you something that I know about. Up here in Vermont, I've been coming up here since 1962. It's a summer place, but I'm here almost 6 months, you know, on and off a year. And the heroin problem up here is rampant. And that's partly because people don't really have a lot of options. They're either cutting summer people's lawns or giving them, you know, feeding them in restaurants. It's a very different way of life than it was when I first came up here in 1962, where everybody was either a farmer or a logger, and they didn't make a brilliant living, but at least they had their way of life. They had community. It was quite different than it is now. Then down in Cambridge, where I live, in the city of Chelsea, which is right outside of Boston, the COVID rate is incredibly high. They tested 200 people. I think a third of them tested positive, and that was right at that moment. It's very much a Latinx community with a lot of immigrants, a lot of them undocumented, but a lot of them documented, who are in essential jobs, live in crowded conditions, have very little money, and they've gotten sick like you wouldn't believe. Meanwhile, during the pandemic, the majority of federal help has gone actually not to the public hospitals that were serving these people, but the private hospitals, like Mount Sinai in New York. Okay. I just wanted to let you know that I just looked at an article a while ago on SNAP that we used to call food stamps. 85% of people on SNAP are working. They are working. They're not sitting around getting food stamps. They're actually at work, and they don't earn enough money to clear the, you know, the top guideline, income guideline for getting food stamps. Now I want to talk about the two books that have come out last year. One is called Deaths of Despair and the Future of Capitalism. And the other is called Tightrope by Nicholas Kristof, who writes for the New York Times, and his wife, Cheryl Wu Dunn. Deaths of Despair is a book written by two Princeton economists who spend summers in Montana. And they got interested in the fact that middle-aged white men seem to have a high death rate. And they looked into this and they did a lot of research on it. And the graphs in the article called How Working Class Life is Killing Americans, it might be in your packet. It's very simple and easy to understand. And my God, it's so compelling. The death rate has increased tremendously in that group, well, as has addiction, deaths by drug overdose, by alcohol overdose, by suicide. The number of people in pain, physical pain, and who have depression has just increased a great deal. I would say since the late 1970s. It's sort of leveled off now because it can't get any worse. And that's because, for their understanding, that's because most of these people don't have a bachelor's degree and can't get into the higher paying jobs if they even exist in their area. The jobs that are available tend to be very low paying in the service sector. And women have more of a chance of getting jobs than men do. So there's a lot of unemployment. Even a BA is no guarantee. It depends on where you live. What people can do is they can go into the military. So a lot of them do. So the armed forces become a real collection point for people who come from the areas that used to be populated by people in manufacturing jobs, many of whom belonged to unions. They made a decent living, and it was a a kind of a, oh, I don't know, a way of life that allowed for some hope for the future. So the loss of income also means a loss of status, a loss of power, a loss of influence, not to mention a loss of self-esteem. And in Elizabeth Anderson's article in the New Yorker called The Structure of Equality, I think you'll find the full article and also an excerpted article that I provided because the other one is so long. And she talks about what is important for people to feel equal. Doesn't mean they have the same amount of money. It just means they feel valued, they feel respected, they feel that their life has some meaning and that they have some hope. For Black people and Latinx people, the earlier deaths of despair are not as, they are growing, but not as much, nearly as much for white people. Because, well, we don't know why exactly, but there tends to be more of a sense of community there. I see that in Chelsea, where I've been a number of times. And even though their COVID rate is very high, their spirit is, I don't know, they have it seems to me a sense of community from whenever I've seen of it. I want to make one more point about the military. If you go into the military, when you don't have other options, what you learn is respect for authority and the power of the gun. And I would put in sort of another category of deaths of despair, and that is, this is me, mind you, people who go on these rampages killing people and themselves. It's a form of suicide, I think, and it's a way out. It's a way out. It's tragic. It's tragic. I mean, if you put all this together, along with the fact that in order for some worker at Walmart to meet his or her quota, there are stories in the news about how they have to pee in a bottle, so they don't have to take bathroom breaks. And this is so that Jeff Bezos can be worth $145.4 billion. The pandemic is an opportunity. Cities and with crowded conditions and low incomes are the hardest hit. But unless policies change, and much has been discussed about this online even before this meeting, if policies don't change, it's only going to get worse. If policies can be changed, there's hope. So I think that's all I have to say, really. People may not agree with everything but I hope you take a look at these books, or at least at the reviews of them. I think you'll find them fascinating. So thank you again, and I'm looking forward to the third part, which I hope will be more hopeful.
Thanks, Elise. Michael, you're on.
Well, thank you, Ben and Zach, and thank you, Elise. I don't know if you realize how influential this meeting can be. Back in 2015, we took on climate change in May of 2015, and by December of 2015, the Paris Climate Accord had been reached by 100 or more nations. So take seriously what we're doing here today, as well as enjoying it. I think that the power of the wealthy and of the corporate world is really at the root of many of our problems. I think the only way to change that is to reduce their political power, and the law case of Citizens United probably has to be overturned through a constitutional amendment. I don't see any other way to do it. A second factor is the minimum pay. We don't have to get to $15 an hour immediately in every state, but it seems to me that that's something, certainly in Massachusetts, that's the absolute minimum to be able to earn a livelihood. Third, and I did spend 12 years in Chelsea running the Neighborhood Housing Services Program, and I can speak to credit. If people don't have access to credit, they can't build wealth. If they have access to bad credit, their wealth can be stripped away from them. I saw that in Chicago. I saw that in Chelsea. I saw that in Boston. Fourth thing, and I'm sure others will address it, is the tax code. Peter Faber has written quite eloquently, and I'm sure others will address it. It's pretty dramatic when people, in good times, were paying 70% top marginal rate, and the bottom strata were paying 20% or so, and that balance has been completely undone, particularly through the most recent tax bills. And then my last point for the moment is demanding that corporations be transparent and act responsibly towards their employees, their customers, and the community. There's no reason why we have to have a corporate structure that answers only to the stockholders. There are corporation Bs. There is an ESG designation, environmental, social, and governance, that can be a filter that all of us and the college too could use as a means of directing money where it's well spent. So these are just some suggestions to get the ball rolling. I look forward to the next 45 minutes or so of others' input.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Ben, do we have a hard cutoff at 3, or can we go a bit beyond?
You can do whatever you like. This account will go for hours, so I think it's about what people's time will allow. Okay. I'm not too worried about that. People can drop off when they need to drop off.
I will try to recognize questions as they come up. So please unmute when you ask your question. So who has the first question?
Can I say one more thing, please?
Sure, Elise.
Oh, thank you. I just want to say that I've been thinking and mulling about this. You know, I don't really know why, but anyway, Michael was very sweet and asked me to do this, and I thought, well, I have no qualification. But anyway, here I am, so I did it. And I've been thinking about it a lot and reading about it ever since. And one thing that struck me is, you know, putting all this together in my own mind, I really have so much more sympathy for the people who voted for Trump. I really do. I mean, think about, you know, I can't tell you how much I hate him, but thinking about where they're coming from and what their options are. Another article that may or may not have sneaked into the packet is a review of Deaths of Despair by Michelle Epstein in the New York Review of Books. And she interviewed some people who didn't even bother to vote in 2016. One woman said, well, what is the point when I have a choice between President Dickhead and President Sellout? By which she meant, you know, Trump and Clinton. I mean, this is how desperate people have become. So I have a lot of sympathy for people.
I did.
I want
They have no
to
stake
say a word
if I can put it that way.
Well, if you're not going to ask a question, please mute. Maurice, were you up?
Patricia has a question.
Patricia, go ahead.
I'd like to say a few words about women. Only one of those graphs differentiated between men and women. And women made across the board half of what men made. That's kind of important, especially if you're a woman. When I left New York
City after working there for 7 years. I was making $8 an hour writing the training manuals for HUD. When I retired at 62, 30 years of professional experience and a master's degree later, I was making $8 an hour and lucky to get it. Unless you stay in some career track throughout your life and climb up the ladder, women are, after 40, I found pretty unemployable.
Okay.
And you just mentioned the 2016 election. The day after the election, there was a forum, which of course had already been scheduled at the college. I can't even remember the subject, but of course everybody was in shock and despair about the results of the election. And the discussion went on for some time. There were 3 panelists, one of which was Allison Dorsey, who is a Black historian. And she said the election was all about race. That was all it was. It was all about race. And other people said this and other people said that. The students, of course, being most of the discussion. And finally, I said, you know what? Hillary Clinton was a woman. And women are not even equal under the Constitution yet. When emancipation came, Black men, if they owned any land at all, could vote. It was decades before women of any class could vote. So let's not pretend this is all equal according to class.
Okay. Who's next? Judy? Who has the floor? Who seeks recognition?
I'd like to ask a question of Elise, and that is, given the growth of automation in our society and the fact that this trend is probably not going to be reversed, where do you see the good jobs of the future coming from, and how do we make sure that they're there for not only our grandchildren, but for the grandchildren of everyone else?
Joan, that is such an important point. I certainly don't have an answer for it. I mean, that would be in the bailiwick of how do we make things better, but that is critical. I mean, one thing is clear, having at least a bachelor's degree is important. It's crucial. And then being able to develop things, you know, jobs in the renewable energy, you know, the things that people are talking about, like renewable energy and sustainable farming. And I don't know. I mean, I don't have an answer for this. Something somehow has to change because people don't want to be on the dole. They don't want to live on government handouts. That's not what gives them pride and respect. So what do people think? I'd love to know what kind of economy we could have. I think the first order of business is to get the inequality taken care of. and then somehow figure out, I mean, it's a worldwide problem. It's not just our problem. So sorry, bud.
I have a question. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Question, I guess, for Zach or Ben first before I comment on what Elise had said. Your wealth and share of U.S. aggregate wealth slide as of 2016, and the change from 2001 to 2016 is beyond belief, frankly. And I wonder, how is there more up-to-date information so we have a better sense of what the situation really is with respect in the middle class, for example, middle income from 144 to 115? Is that still maintain that kind of a trend, or has things changed in 4 years, or don't you know?
So overall, these trend lines are holding relatively stably. I know in 2019, there was the first signs that the working class and the middle class might have been starting to see the first real increases in wages since the Great Recession. However, any shifting trends towards the recovery that we would have been seeing develop in the last year or two have since been destroyed by coronavirus. So while there was maybe a slither of hope that we were seeing a reversal of trends since from the 2017 tax code changes to the coronavirus, I think at this point it is safe to say that these trends are only continuing and only going to get worse in the aftermath of 2020.
Okay, and Elise, your comment about the need for a BA. Since my estrangement from Swarthmore, when I decided not to play football anymore, I became involved with the community college down here in Delaware. And I've become really impressed with the kind of work they do at that level to get people into jobs that we need. And I'm not at all sure that what we need is BAs, but we need more focus on what the needs are now, and to focus the resources on people like the community college that can address those things in the short term.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. That's very good. It's true. A lot of community colleges are doing great work in preparing people for needed jobs. That's an excellent point.
Maybe Chris or Michael or somebody could take on the Economist article recently that suggested that the wealth inequality was plateauing rather than increasing, which I found striking and uncomfortable. Anybody want to comment on that?
I would comment on it.
Please.
Being one that circulated, but you should know about the latest evidence in economics. Within the last year and a half, 2 different authoritative groups of economists have determined that wealth inequality is decreasing in recent periods. The first group is Catherine, Miller, and Sarn, 2019, all of the University of Pennsylvania. The second is Smith, Zidar, and Zwick, 2020, U.S. Treasury Department, Princeton, and Chicago. I can give sites for those interested. For example, the principal conclusion on wealth inequality of the Catherine et al. Paper is this. For the 30 years from 1989 to 2016, the shares for the top 1%, 0.1%, and 0.01% have decreased by 5.5%, 2.8%, and 1.4% respectively. You can find these data on their page 36. Thus, it is no longer accurate to talk of rising, growing, booming, exploding, or rampant spiraling inequality.
John, can I comment?
Please.
Yeah, as I've said in one of my emails, whether the extent of inequality is increasing or decreasing, I don't think is important. It's there. Whether it decreases a bit, it'll still be very substantial. One result is that wealthy people have an inordinate influence over our political process. And you pointed out in your email that it may take a constitutional amendment to fix that. But I think more importantly, the safety net for lower income people is frayed. And I think we need to boost that up. In the 1930s, during the Great Depression, we saw the birth of Social Security. The country rethought how it addressed the problems of poorer people. And I think that we need to do that now, given not only coronavirus, but just the state of the economy in general. And certainly one thing is to fix our healthcare system and make sure that healthcare is available for people at the low end of the economic spectrum. Say ratios of wealth to poverty, I think are not that significant. I think the important thing is we care for people at the low end, and we make people at the high end pay a much larger proportion of the tax burden. And I've pointed out in a couple of emails, there are a number of ways in which this can be done.
I'd like to jump in for a moment. This conversation I devoted to where we'd like to be, where we can get and how we can get there, rather than focusing a great deal on the past. One thing that can be done that actually came out of our last session 5 years ago is the carbon tax, which, if equitably done, taxes carbon and sends dividends to everybody and benefits. It's actually a manner of wealth. Another factor I'd like to mention, based on my years in Chelsea, is to get people credit, you need to take a look at some of the factors other than their credit scores. If they've been paying 50% of their rent faithfully for the last 10 years, they deserve a loan.
Ben and Zach, how can you reconcile what Will's saying with what you're finding?
Ben Stern and Zach, are you guys on? Can you hear this?
Yeah. So I lost big track of names, but Will was the one who brought up the two previous papers, the two papers he was talking about.
This morning.
The camera.
Sorry, what was it?
Could I say something, John?
Please.
I would like to reinforce what Peter said, that there's no point in our debating the intricacies of the points that regarding the trend in inequality. I think Will makes some very good points if you want to get into the statistics of wealth inequality. There are some criticisms that could be made of Piketty, Esaias, and so forth, but I don't think that's relevant. In terms of income inequality, it's clear that income inequality has increased enormously. And the issue really with regard to wealth inequality, again, as Peter said, it has to do with the functioning of our political system. There's a great deal of that wealth is being used to distort our political system. So frankly, I have great respect for Will and his points. His points are I agree with in a technical sense. I don't think that that point should distract us from the fact that the wealth inequality and the income inequality is much too high. So with regard to, that, if we move on a little bit, we're going into what to do about things. I'd like to suggest that we talk about Elizabeth Warren's proposal to tax the wealth of people with $50,000 or more.
50 million.
And people with $1 billion at 3%. That wealth tax would raise an enormous amount of income, and we're going to need a great deal of government income as we go forward, and not least because of the result of the COVID crisis. Government debt is mushrooming, as well it should. We're in a wartime situation. It should be spending a great deal of money. Down the road, we are going to have to deal with that debt. And well, I guess the other point is that in resolving the issues involving inequality, we need a great deal more government spending.
John?
Uh-oh.
Who's up?
Oh, I would have made a comment, but there were several. But I wanted to
Go ahead,
ask about, people are talking about tax rulings. And from what I understand, many of those people aren't using they're not putting their money here in the States. They're leaving it outside of the States in various places of, you know, the Bahamas or whatever. And I just wonder, how are we going to get this money back?
Diane.
By changing the tax code.
Yeah, this is Anne. May I?
Please.
Say a word?
Please.
You're getting into the area, Sue, of what policies we need. And just to put it very simply, we need a new tax code. We need to enforce the tax code. We need to increase the revenue of the IRS. And we need antitrust brought up to date and with sufficient government employees to proceed. And there are lots of other policies as well. But I wanted to speak about, I think I have here, 4 opportunities for reskilling our population, a term I've only recently learned, which means give them more and appropriate education. And the areas in which we could find and create new jobs for a reskilled population, with the emphasis quite clearly on what has been or used to be called the middle class and the lower classes, but others as well. Education. We have to change the educational system, and we have a tremendous opportunity because digital education is with us now for the next eon, I would guess. We have a connectivity divide in this country because there simply isn't any broadband anywhere in the rural places, in the urban bad housing situations, et cetera. So that's one whole area that could provide reskilling and retargeted reskilling to create the kind of workforce that's needed to do for our country what President Eisenhower did in the interstate highway system. So broadband, et cetera, et cetera. So the connectivity divide is one target of opportunity. Another is artificial intelligence. It's going to be very closely related to the fact that people working from home globally is going to be the wave of the future. We're in it, and it's not going to go away. And the uses of artificial intelligence and the need to bring the best minds of the globe, assuming there are security observations, into artificial intelligence is a tremendous opportunity. And we need to educate the brains in our own society and draw on the best brains from around the world. Another area of opportunity for creating jobs is the whole biological application, uses all of the AI and the connectivity, et cetera, et cetera. I'm no expert, but I think of our dear classmate who got the Nobel Prize participating in the biology revolution. And then, so connectivity to biology. Okay, the other points, if you'll bear with me and permit me to speak about labor and immigration. Immigration is going to be a different kind of a topic than it's been because of the new connectivity, global connectivity, and Zoom and other such technologies. If you need the best brains in something, you can get the best brains in something. If you want to train the best brains that aren't being properly trained and aren't being given the opportunity, you can have educational policies, that will inform how we do our education. But we're not going to have the pressures and the mess of education of the last few years, the tragedy of it. It's going to be a different kind of immigration problem. But we are going to have to reskill our skilled workforce. We need to note that farmers are now essential in this rubric of immigration, and that's probably the most important point that we're going to have to deal with in immigration. Farmers are essential and farm workers are essential, and either we get our population currently within our borders to work in farming, or we get a decent policy on it. That's all we can say. And it can be permanent immigration. It can be immigration as it was, pardon me, back to the Eisenhower era, with time limits, and those were enforced. Whatever it is, that's a clear one, because farmers are essential and they've got to be in this country for us. Pardon my nationalism. There will continue, of course, to be trade. I'm not trying to say that isn't going to happen. And then I think this is finally, students coming to the US are going to decrease for the reasons mentioned earlier. They don't have to come, they can work remotely. But it will be, but that still should be a target of immigration. I just want to leave, I think this is my last one. I think we have to be more serious about addressing universal basic income. Some of you may think of it as the Yang proposal during the Democratic primary period. And I understand why a lot of people don't think it's a good idea, but unless we give people the possibility of having some floor of income, $15,000 is not a lot of money to give people an opportunity to do their own budgeting, to make their own decisions. And there's some wonderful research going on in California cities, I think primarily. You give people $1,000 a month that's at lower income levels, and voila, they're the best budgeteers. And this is from the lowest area, strata of our income. They become the best budgeteers, and they make sure their children get what they need and that they're going to be skilled, et cetera. So I think we need to, I've read a lot of stuff online about why it was not a good idea, but I think we have to readdress it and work it into the, to what could be a simple and fair way of dealing with that. Oh, and then finally, that's a third final, and I'm out. Reskilling needs scale. There are lots of good reskilling jobs at, as you point out, at community colleges. But scale on this needs federal money, as do a lot of the other points on this. And I'll go to the Stiglitz article and say, you know, the point that he makes that without a strong state, we need a strong state. We need to have the right kind of strong state. Taxing. The business, the market is not going to work correctly. And we've seen a lot of the market not working correctly. So I'll stop there and thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you, Ann.
John,
who's next?
John?
Could I make a comment?
If I could,
I'd like to say
something. Is that Norm?
A lot of good stuff.
Whoa.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
I don't have a list of participants.
Can you hear me?
So who seeks recognition, as they say in the house?
Is
that Norm?
I do.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's Norm.
Yeah, I can hear.
Yes, I had a problem with this thing and I fixed it, and we're okay.
I got you.
Yeah, a lot of beautiful thoughts, of course. A lot of things we have to do. We have to help secure some bootstraps for people who aren't doing well, some because they're ill or whatever. We have to get the money into the government's hands, both state and national, through big tax changes and changes in lots of policies. But how do we do that for the future? I think one of the most cogent thoughts I've heard is Elise, when she mentioned some feeling of sadness for the Trump supporters, or whatever word she used. In fact, if you look at Luzerne County, north of us in Pennsylvania, very poor county, they voted for Obama twice. They were not racists. I doubt if they were sexist, but I don't know. They voted for him twice. And what happened? In fact, Obama, first time in my life, I went door to door in Lower McCountry Township, handing out Obama things. I put signs on my lawn. Never done it. That was his first term. Then, of course, he put Summers in after 3 months, and I realized I had been sort of hoodwinked. Now, during Obama's terms, what happened to the Luzerne County people, a lot of people in the hollows of Kentucky and Ohio, their net worth went down. Well, millionaires and other people market they were doing nicely. Again, these were people who were desperate and they wanted change, and they had two choices. Initially, they had Bernie Sanders or they had Trump. Now, Bernie Sanders was telling what he would probably try to end up doing, whether he could, I don't know. Trump was, of course, spewing garbage, but they needed something. They had hope that Trump was honest, and they voted for Trump. So these people were desperate, and they did worse under Obama. I think when Hillary at the second debate with Bernie Sanders said, "I will follow Obama's policies," I turned to my wife, Jet, and I said, "She just lost the damn election." People were wanting change. So I think even now, people want and need change. And we need a change in political leadership to get the change in the tax structure. And it ain't gonna happen with the party Democrats or the Republicans. That is still what we're gonna be faced with this year. But my feeling is, anyone I can speak to about progressive ideas, I speak to them. We voted absentee ballot last week, and Biden was on Bernie was on the ballot here. We voted for him. Maybe give a little more power in the convention or whatever happens. But we need a change in political leadership, which is very far from our current Democratic or Republican Party. And that's a toughie. Any ideas welcome.
Thank you, Norm. Who else? We're getting a little close to the end of our time. I heard more than one voice a minute ago.
Hi, John. This is John Goodman. I'd like to say something.
Go ahead.
I want to applaud raising the issue of universal basic income. Elise was mentioning that people don't want money to be on the government dole. Well, it's because we give the government dole to people who are lower class and less able to make their own way, so we'll help them out. Universal basic income says everybody is entitled to have money. And I think if we look at the marketplace, the market when it's running well, consumer spending is a very, very large part of it. So we really do want to have everybody be able to be a good consumer. If we give the same amount of money to everybody, the people who are wealthy will probably sock it away in their savings. The people who are poor will run right out and spend it. And that means the market will benefit. So universal basic income is, I think, almost a no-brainer. It's got to be done. And if we go to that Stiglitz article about starving the state, if we start by saying we need money to do what the state needs to do, and if universal basic income is one of those things, then it must raise enough taxes somehow. And I think progressive taxation is a necessity, and we're getting away from that. In fact, it's a regressive rather than a progressive tax right now. So we do need to change that. But universal basic income, I think, needs to be a part of it. Also, when we have more and more automation, yes, you can maybe retrain people for other jobs, but there may be jobs that go away, and too many of them, and we may not be able to provide income producing jobs for everyone sufficiently. But universal basic income would let everyone continue to be a consumer. And I think that's critical. Enough said.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John.
Can I speak for a minute? Oops.
Sue?
Yeah. The thing that I'm feeling really strongly is that this has happened on our watch. There's no doubt about it. And I feel in many ways that unfortunately we weren't able to be told about it during this time because the information wasn't really being presented very well. But now we really know. And to me, it feels like we need to still take responsibility for this, not just talking about it, but really getting out and figuring out what we can actually do. I mean, I think it was great that Norm went around for Obama. I think we all went around for Obama. But what are we doing now? And the people that we're looking to, I'm really concerned that the Black voices are not being really heard loud enough, because they have a lot of these ideas that we're talking about, and they need to be supported in this, like the Movement for Black Lives, M4BL, is a very good website to look to get some ideas about what they're concerned about. And I would really like to see us pay attention to the racial side of this injustice as well as the women. I think the women, I think Elizabeth Warren didn't get anywhere because she's a woman. I'm totally in agreement with that. But I really do think we can't just sit home and read books. I'm just so frustrated that we're not, you know, somehow coming up. Well, individually, maybe you all are. I don't want to, but I'm really concerned about the white supremacy side of this whole picture. And I really want to hear people get angry and get active. That's my piece. Thanks.
Thank you, Sue.
May I?
I don't
John,
know.
may I?
You have unmuted.
I am
Is
on.
that Maurice?
Maurice, yes. Thank you, Sue, for what you had to say. I think that we really need to think in those ways. You know, as I've said, and lots of people starting to say, at least in this world, that race is not a biological fact, it's a social construct. So that is something we can deal with in the structure of our nation. I want to know what people really want. We have been living with for centuries now an aspirational constitution up to which we have not lived. Aspirations there that we are still seeking to put into life. And that is certainly part of our responsibility. And we can reach to the younger generation that's coming in our footsteps as well, to be with them and making the kinds of changes that we need. I think all of this talk about the taxation and so on is important. How we govern is important. Who is a part of the constituency of our nation? All of us. Who are the interdependent in the world? All of us. We need each other. We need to get out there and do the work. We can't let it go by. What do you want America to be? If you read the Constitution, if you look back at our history, if you look at that 1619 project that the New York Times put out, if you look at the way we are continuing to treat the Native American, the indigenous population that was here when the settlers came, there is so much to be undone. But it's how we do and what we do and how we live and what we model that matters. And so I think the charge is clear. It's just picking up your part of it, my part of it, our part of it, and getting more done. It can be done.
I'm afraid, Joan, last point, I'm afraid. Joan, go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to raise something in response to Maurice's very eloquent statement, and that is the pervasiveness of racism in America has been so well documented. I don't need to rehash that since before the founding of the Republic. And a universal basic income would certainly help all people equally. How does the group feel about reparations for past horrible inequalities that have obtained for African-American citizens and other groups?
I think we need to keep this conversation going, John, for maybe another 20 minutes or so.
Ben, can we do that? Ben, can we do that?
He said, yeah.
All right with me. And I think that people, I will say this when I say the same thing in my classes, if we go over, anybody who needs to leave can drop off and write a note to the group if they want to in the chat session. But I can stand for the 20 minutes longer.
Well, before people drop off, many thanks to all of you for being here. Many thanks to Ben, Michael, everybody who's helped to make this work. Okay, who was it? Joan? Was it you, Joan?
Yes.
Who's next? So we'll go another 20 minutes.
Michael, were you going to make?
That's all right.
Yeah. I'd like to
Michael,
reinforce. I'd like to reinforce what Sue said. I don't know how many of you heard Mike Dukakis on Thursday night saying the only way that elections get won is if you have a precinct captain and precinct workers in every precinct in every state in the United States. We all need to get involved in this. We need to show our own anger. We need to encourage other people who are angry about the way things are. Consider things like Ann Sloan's comment on the Yang Gang $1,000 a month. Look at what the pandemic's done to us. I think we need to make the place a better place as a result of the pandemic than just saying, well, let's try to limp back to where we were. And healthcare has to be number one. A well-thinking sports club owner said the other day, our health is our wealth. And that's a community thing that all of us need.
Thank you, Michael.
John?
Thanks. Yes.
I'd like to observe that looking at the student body and the faculty and the curriculum of today's Swarthmore, I think the college is much better equipped to prepare its graduates to handle these problems than the Swarthmore of our years was. I hope you'll all agree with that.
Oh, stop.
Guess who did that?
Thank you, Maurice.
John, I was thinking.
Yes, thanks, Maurice, for playing such a big role in that. We're glad to see so much of you at our reunions.
Yes. John, I was thinking of an experience I had. I read Hillbilly Elegy a couple of years ago, and the lesson I got out of it, which was different from most people's lessons, was that big factories moved in, drew people out of the hills, and then the factories went away. And we've seen that pattern over and over again in this country, especially in New England, where we had the mills, which made cotton, cotton fabric, and then they closed, they went south. And so we had unemployment in New England, and eventually the factories, the brick factories, were repurposed. So one of the questions I have is, how do we repurpose the infrastructure that we have today?
Good point.
I think part of that is rebuilding the infrastructure. One thing I thought the Democrats and Republicans could all agree upon would be rebuilding, whether it's railroads or roadways or bridges. There's billions of dollars of relatively uneducated workforce that can be employed that way. We also need to recognize that 12 grades of education used to be enough. 14 might be the new 12, and that free education through community college should be through a technical college should be a given rather than something you have to fight for.
Sure.
Can I just say something, speaking of, I wanted to say it several times, about community colleges. My land borders on what's the Vermont Technical College. And the chancellor of the colleges of Vermont, about 3 weeks ago, announced that this college would be closed. There was a huge outcry, and the chancellor ended up resigning. And one of the things about this particular college is it's a technical college. The people that go here frequently are people whose parents never went to college, and they learn skills such that 98% of their graduates get jobs, and frequently jobs in Vermont. And yet the Vermont Higher Education Council wanted to eliminate this university or this college. So there are lots of jobs that are not, I mean, it's a technical college, but it's not necessarily, I mean, they do have an IT part of it, but they also do things like making robots and things like that. They learn skills like that that will be used and are still needed. And the fact that they're 98% of their graduates get jobs is a proof of that. They also train nurses and so forth. So this kind of education is useful, and we will always need them. We will always need plumbers. We will always need electricians. We will always need a lot of people. We need physical skills, and we need to keep colleges like that. In Vermont in particular, we complain about the fact that people leave here, and yet we are considering, and Vermont, by the way, has a terrible reputation. I think it's number 42 out of 50 in terms of funding public education. And we're having a big thing about that. And there are local companies, a lot of local companies who have a tie to Vermont Technical College. It's their source of employees. And they have spoken up. This is the business community. They have spoken up and said, do not close this. So that's something we also really have to do, is to really emphasize community colleges and so forth. So that's my thing.
Okay. Silence mean that we're getting ready to wrap up?
I got one more point.
Okay, Michael.
I can adjust the word.
Go ahead, Norm.
Oh, just to plug, join a lot of my medical colleagues in supporting Medicare for all. Obamacare is not going to do it. There's still too many uninsured. Prices of plans have skyrocketed and services provided have diminished. All of us know what we pay too, even in Medicare. Medicare for all is, I think, critical to our nation's future.
Okay.
I'd like,
maybe, sorry, who's up?
That's Mary Lynn.
Hi, Mary Lynn.
To speak to something that has a really long range view. I think we need to all support early childhood education. The brain development of little children is something that it's just a crime to lose it. And if we can teach all of our people to be self-teachers, like the people in this room I know are all self-teachers. I've been teaching myself since before I got to Swarthmore, and I'm sure you have too. But if we can give that attitude, starting with little children, and help them to have self-confidence and know how to proceed, I think we will help our economy in the long run.
Thanks, Mary Lynn.
Could I say something about that? Could I
going twice?
And one more thing.
John, could I say something?
Okay, Chris.
Well,
okay, Chris.
I just want to endorse what Mary Lynn said. I was going to mention that too. That's one aspect of inequality that is really very blatant and has always been there. But think about the environment for poor children in America, and I go on about, and you know about the 4-year-olds and the difference in their cognitive abilities and their vocabulary, and what about the marshmallow test, and just a lot of poor children who don't get an adequate childhood. I just wanted to mention one statistic that I ran across comparing ourselves with Canada. In the United States, single mothers, 1/2 of single mothers work more than 40 hours a week. In Canada, only 1/4 of single mothers have that situation. So it's, can you imagine these single mothers, and we force them to work long hours, and they're supposed to be taking care of their children. It's.
I think we have to turn to Ben now for a wrap up. Ben, and thanks. Ben?
The last point I had, John, was in terms of college endowment. The Board of Managers does not believe the endowment should be used to make social statements, no matter how compelling that's the cause. That's a quote from the board. And I'd just like to make a statement that with Obama and everyone else calling wealth inequality the defining issue of our time, we asked the Swarthmore College Board of Managers to use that frame of reference in terms of decision making on where the college puts its money.
Could I say something?
Maurice?
I understand that what you're saying, Michael, and I'm happy that this college has eliminated loans for its students and is using the endowment in that way. And I also think that it really is committed as an institution to creating agents of change in the world, I think is one way to state what it's about. But certainly one could keep addressing this matter. I don't know if the board is going to change about it, but on the other hand, it is using the money well in a number of ways, which I think is a good thing. I also I like the idea about teaching the young very much and making the quality of that education much stronger than it has been. And I would urge that the arts be included in the education of all children, because it does such magical things, particularly music, in the development of their brains and their perspectives of themselves and the world. So all of that, I think, are things that we could champion, both in our own lives and more broadly, for the sake of making education the path to the kinds of futures everybody ought to be able to produce for themselves in an egalitarian democracy that we dream ourselves being. So onward and upward is what I say.
Okay, Ben, I think we have to turn to you for a wrap up. You can summarize all of this.
John,
Sorry?
excuse me, this is Marcia.
Hi,
Could I
Marcia.
just say one thing from a view from overseas? And that is that this moment of crisis is like our Jungian dark side is coming up. And it's a moment when we've got to pay our bills in many, many ways with our racism, with the way we've treated our working class, with our insularity. We still are part of the world, and people still look to the United States. And I can't tell you what tears I have that I can no longer talk about democratic theory or about the ideals that we have had. It breaks my heart. And as we talk about education, honestly, we have to teach young Americans that we're part of this earth. When we talk about global climate change, it's a globe. America isn't just like this and closed off. We don't teach our kids geography. We don't teach our kids that they're people of all races and colors and religions and ways of looking at the world, and that there are many models that work in different ways. So I just wanted to give a little bit of an international perspective.
Thank you, Marcia.
Yep. I'd just like to ask if there are people that want to continue the conversation longer. I know, John, you're feeling responsible for having it be a reasonable amount of time, and perhaps everybody will leave, but it seemed like there were still a lot of that people wanted to say.
Ben, if we can keep going, I'm happy to go as long as there's people who want to talk.
Absolutely. If you'll let me do some dishes while while it's going on, my kitchen is right behind me. You can talk as long as we like. My kids aren't coming back to the house for a couple of hours, so you know, have at it.
Okay. Sue, do you want?
I'm going to say goodbye.
I have to say what particularly precipitated my awakening was reading the new Jim Crow, which led me on to reading a lot of other recent authors, just like Ta-Nehisi Coates. And I think as you get more aware of what's going on, you can see that there really is a moral issue here. It's not just economic. I think one of the reasons that things have been getting worse is because we have not been taking a sense of responsibility for what's happening in our country. And I'm just, it's devastating to see what's happened. So I really, really urge people to try to find what aspect of it they can put their heart into and try to do something. We just can't be sitting by and I mean, the next 10 years, everybody who is involved in the climate says the next 10 years, so we'll all be 90, but I know a lot of 90-year-olds that are very active still. And that is not, to me, any excuse to sit at home and not become involved in something that's going on in your own area. My own area. That's enough.
Can I say something?
Elise.
Hello? Yeah, this is Elise. I don't know if this will make anybody feel better, but you know, a lot of these things that we consider so shocking and horrible are things that have always been with us. This is not new. I think what the good thing is and the hopeful thing is that with the internet and social media, as mixed a blessing as that is, at least now people are more educated about these things. Like, I mean, I don't think there's anybody now who doesn't know what happened to the Native Americans. I think there are fewer people who don't really understand what happened at the beginning with slavery and how it was essentially written into the Constitution or taken out. You know, the real egalitarian language was taken out. But there's much more of a recognition, and I think that's hopeful because at least it gives us a more understandable grounding to start from. You know, and Marcia, we've been here before. We've had know-nothings, and we've had isolationists, and all that's always been with us. You know, we've had the Gilded Age, all that stuff. It's just that, you know, I guess you might say good and evil are always fighting with each other, and it's an ongoing battle. It will be an ongoing battle. Before we were here, it'll be an ongoing battle afterward. And at least people are a little bit more aware now. So I just wanted to point that out.
I just have to say that there's a pretty clear-cut good and evil in terms of the current White House. And unless we all get out there and do something, a lot of this talk is in vain. Get out the vote.
Well, I'd like to say something in response to Elise. We've always had these problems, but also the coronavirus, horrible as it's been, has given us a great opportunity when things get better and the election hopefully turns out the way that we all fervently want. It is possible to think about change in terms of a response to a really bad time. This happened after the flu epidemic. This has happened after the Great Depression. There've been some moments in history when, you know, you can look to European history as well, some moments in history where a plague has happened and there has been a change for the better in the political system. So to end on a note of hope.
Where do you see this being talked about? Where do you see people focusing on what they want, like maybe the minimum wage or minimum income, or more money into the public transportation and housing, and where, I mean, outside of the political scene?
Well, I think outside the political scene, you can see it in the peaceful protesters of the George Floyd killing. You can see it. I'm trying to think offhand of various ways in which things have changed. I think we're all thinking about, for example, a minimum wage. That there have been several ideas presented here. We're all thinking about a fairer tax code. So I think these things, were certainly many Americans now are thinking about healthcare. So
I'll throw one more thing into this. Most of my teaching, I was teaching international relations, but the courses I taught at the advanced level assumed that kids had gotten some basic civics education beforehand. And it was really shocking the extent to which that was not the case. The
right.
kids got their civics from American history, and that's good, but it's not sufficient, and it really shows.
Mm. That's true.
And we don't teach history well, period, and least of all ours.
Well, the books that we're still reading.
In terms of solutions, it's worthwhile looking at the book that James Fallows wrote, where he visited, I don't know how many different communities around the United States in his plane, and talked to local leaders. And these were communities that had somehow or other succeeded. They weren't necessarily wealthy, but they had very low unemployment, and they were doing very, very well. And it was local leadership and repurposing of old infrastructure that was the secret. It's really worth reading.
Sounds good. One of the things that the Movement for Black Lives and others are trying to advocate is to take money away from the police departments, because they are using it in destructive ways. So I don't know how people feel about that, but I would be curious.
It's like nothing has changed
Disagree with
since the
that.
60s.
Could I
as far
say
as
that?
police are concerned. Who's up?
Could I say something?
Sure, go, Chris. Go
So,
ahead, Chris.
I have to disagree with that. We absolutely need the police force. You know, when you weaken the police force, crime takes off. We can't do without the police. And the idea that we should withdraw funds from the police department, that makes no sense.
Well, they sure need money for training then.
Yes, more training.
That's really, really key.
Yeah, well, let me say something, if I may. What we need to do is get the emphasis off the military. I think we've become such an incredibly militarized nation. We're arming everybody in the world. I say that as an exaggeration, but it's not a big one. I think that I'd rather see people going into the domestic police force and being well trained than going into the armed services, running all over the place and killing people overseas. So that's something that really concerns me about. It's sort of under the radar, but how militarized a society we actually are.
That's something that would actually be changed relatively easily. Currently, veterans are given preference in hiring for police positions. Simply removing that would take away some of the militaristic aspects of new police officers.
Interesting.
It seems like nothing has changed. The progress has been made in the last 30, 40 years. the police have not been part of it.
Sarah's got her hand up.
Sarah?
Unmute yourself.
You're muted, Sarah.
Thank you.
Sarah?
I'm hoping that Anne Brownell Sloan will be willing to put out on the listserv, the group's IO, a fleshed out statement of what I'm calling her reskilling manifesto. And one reason that I would welcome that is that I have decided, in spite of my advanced age, to use the energy I have to finally do what I've always wanted to do, which is run for school committee, a local school committee. And I've followed the school committee candidates, and the town is getting much larger. And I believe the Reskilling Manifesto would help me at least interview other candidates for school committee in my town. And Ed, you mentioned, Ed Steiner, of all people, mentioned going to a community college. Absolutely. Deval Patrick at one point proposed making community college free for all in Massachusetts. Didn't happen, but one of the Swarthmore graduates older than I in the Swarthmore Book Club that Lincoln Potter and I attend monthly is teaching at Bunker Hill Community College. And if she can do it, so can I. And what I find is, yes, there's a lot of history that's not known, but even more, there is an unconsciousness of the ploys of using language, as Trump does, hyperbole, metaphor, sloganizing, to teach something about using language. That's it. But Anne, please, I'd like more than my handwritten list. And your initial point that came before or with the reading list, that was right on the mark.
John, you guys?
Thank you. Thank you all.
I have some experience in management, police management. And I think one of the things that we may not be focused on is there are a variety of reasons why a person wants to become a police officer. From the very altruistic to the very, I gotta have power, and power I can exercise with this gun on my hip. And people are involved in police management somehow, or have to develop a sense of understanding of that range of motivations, and to be able to recognize as a person's career evolves where that person is in that spectrum. And got to find a way to weed out and control guys like the guy who ended up with his knee in the guy's neck.
That's very helpful, Ed. How could that happen? What police, how do you get an idea like that out?
Well, I think what you do is you say to the guys who are in the police management business and the recruiting business, hey, you got to be aware of this stuff and develop methods to try to get some sense of what's going on in the guy's career as it develops to try to guide him, grade him, or to weed him out.
Yeah. Is there a police union that would be approachable with that idea?
Yeah, they are a union. And if you've had a deal with it, the unions are full for their business, but they also are political organizations who are required to protect individuals.
But that's the problem.
It is a problem.
Yeah. Well, we have too many intellectuals here, and I don't know, people who are on the working force lines, ex-police officers. They seem to be family members of a lot of people I know now, and it's hard. It's very hard to be a police officer right now.
Don't you think it again relies on getting the politicians in in the positions of power that owe their positions to us and not to corporations, banks, big pharma, and so forth. Without, it's very hard for us to do things now as much as we'd like to go out because we're fighting immense wealth. The lobbyist group actually is one who got millions and millions of dollars through the first tranche of Save Our Economy money, whatever it is, of the House. The lobbyist group, they're a nonprofit. So we're fighting so much money. Somebody mentioned the legality of corporations being people, changing that. But it's going to be a process. I think we have to get the politicians in who are right. Good.
It's very tempting to keep explaining about things, but if you all are not engaged in maybe changing your way of doing your finances away from banks that are supporting the fossil fuel business, I just want you to know that there is, through the Sierra Club, a way of doing a credit card that is not backed up by the big, you know, Bank of America, Citibank kind of places like that. Just saying.
Excuse me, this is Ann, and I was having a blackout on my screen when somebody talked and mentioned my name and requested something on reskilling, and I don't know who it was.
It was Sarah.
Sarah.
Yes.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, folks, are we maybe wrapping up? What do you think? Going once, going twice?
Everybody.
Go for it.
Thank you, John, for having organized.
John, what if we do this every 6 months?
Sounds good to me. Sounds good.
You know, not wait for another 5 years.
Great.
Ben, let's give you a chance to wrap up, summarizing all this discussion.
I'm not going to do that. I am going to thank you. I mean, this is, look, this kind of thing, and the fact that you had Ben Stern staying on as long as he did, had other things to do, but because the conversation is so interesting, stimulating, intergenerational, Swarthmore-like, or Swarthmorian is the best way I can describe it. It's one of the great privileges of being at the college and having these kinds of conversations with people of all ages. So I appreciate all the work and thought that went into this. I also, by the way, appreciate the comment about the college curriculum now preparing students maybe better to meet the world's demands than formerly. And the Lang Center for Civic and Social Responsibility, which I direct alongside while being a professor too, is a big proponent of what we call engaged scholarship. We follow Maurice really in this regard. Maurice has always been an advocate not only of the arts, but also of doing things that orient the college's resources, not just Swarthmore colleges, but any college, towards pressing social, environmental, political, economic problems. But I also want to point out that something that Swarthmore has always done, well before the notion of engaged scholarship came in, was maybe disengaged scholarship, or that sounds bad. I'll say privately engaged scholarship, the traditional liberal arts. And I would not for a minute want to denigrate the importance of that, which is what, I mean, I did traditional liberal arts in college and got very involved in politics and community activism after that, without having had classes that combined the two, because teaching critical thinking is so important. We see that looking at the political world. A lot of our actors aren't thinking very critically, or think that critical thinking simply means criticizing everyone who doesn't think like them. So the importance of critical thinking, and also just an appreciation of the beauty of the world, because why else would young people want to get involved and preserve the world that we have together if they didn't have that appreciation? So the liberal arts does that. I think Swarthmore clearly did it when you all were there as well. And it's my plug for what a great place the college is, even though there's very few people on campus right now. But I also want to acknowledge what was clear from some of the different points of view that was put out there, that have been put out there, as well as in some of your email digests, that nothing comes without a cost. Raise the minimum wage, and prices are like, or have a UBI too, or universal basic income. It could cause costs to go up. Landlords know how much money people have in their pockets. It's not simply, or you're printing money, and there are difficulties with that. Minimum wage, raise that all the way across the board. And it may be the case that some jobs are eliminated as automation speeds up, as fast food places, taxi services, Uber, have more of an incentive to push forward automation that they have already. When I was, Ben Stern and I were in an honor seminar on political theory in the fall, and we did 2 weeks on Marx, Karl Marx. These days, politics, Groucho might be more appropriate, but for 2 weeks. And I related to the students a story that supposedly could be it could be a urban legend kind of thing, but or apocryphal. But it's an anecdote supposedly that happened with Henry Ford giving a tour of his assembly line to Walter Reuther, the labor organizer and auto union labor organizer. And supposedly Ford said, look, Walter, this is the future, man. Okay, you got all these machines doing all the work. Who are you going to organize when machines are building everything? And Reuther is supposed to have said, well, Henry, if machines are doing all the work in this future, who's going to have the money to buy your cars? We are at that point. Right? We see now when people we're getting money to help out with the coronavirus, which is super important to keep things afloat, but it's difficult because it could cause prices to go up. There's no easy solutions, is what I want to say. So we have difficult solutions we've got to come to, and that's going to need coalitions. And that's where politics comes in. So much of what you've been talking about has been laying out beautifully different aspects of the problem. We all know probably the story or anecdote of the blind men, let's call it, say, blind people and the elephant, right? The different blind people who each approach the elephant from a different vantage and feel one part of it, and then insist that an elephant is kind of a bushy, long thing, the tail, or an elephant is kind of a sharp, curved thing, each describing a part of it, and they come to blows eventually in their arguments because they're so certain that what they are describing, which is real, is the whole, the entirety of reality. And we see that in politics today, and we have to be able to build coalitions. And I want to give a shout out to two of your classmates. Arlie Hochschild was already mentioned in the packet. There was a review of her work, I think it was, but Arlie Hochschild, class of '62, has a book that some of you may have read already, Strangers in Their Own Land, written before the Trump presidency, but during the time of the Tea Party, when Trump was just beginning to be a phenomenon, and written her as a sociologist going to Louisiana, deep into what would become, or it was a red state, will become Trump country, talking sympathetically to people who were seeming, apparently, you might think, voting against their economic interests for all kinds of reasons. And she tried to be sympathetic, understand them. And it goes to the comment that's come up a couple of times, of feeling sympathy for those in this other camp. And yet there's great difficulty, because if you've got people insisting, well, the big problem is that people like us who have been waiting for so long in line, doing everything we're supposed to be doing, now there's line jumpers, immigrants, people of color getting more preferential treatment. If they're insisting that, and there's something to what they're saying, but of course, people of color, we've seen all the graphs, we see the charts about where wealth is and what the median wealth is. They're absolutely a reality to what they are saying as well. There are those like Allison Dorsey saying that the election was all about race. Right now, I have many African-American friends who are so deeply emotionally distraught and are protesting, whether it's peacefully or violently, and who insist that it's all about race. Each of these things, Patricia earlier pointed out how a lot is about gender. Each of these things is playing a role. So being able to come together and form coalitions so that people aren't just either talking past each other or thinking, well, they're my enemy, because although we've got this in common, let's say economic interests, we've got this other cultural or racial or religious divide. That's going to be one of the most important things. And the other Swarthmore I want to single out is Bob Putnam, who's a dear colleague of mine I got to know in graduate school, who class of '63, who wrote Our Kids, which is, I think, a great companion piece to Arlie Hochschild's book, because although it's about really kind of the end of the American dream, the end of upward mobility, including in Rust Belt areas that are white, not just where they're primarily people of color. But the titular part of that, our kids, he's suggesting that we need to view the next generation as our kids, as a community. I can't count the number of times I heard we being used today, which I love. You're talking about we in a community. The great difficulty of viewing all those kids as our kids is a lot of people feel like, well, but no, my values are different from the other group's values. So I don't want my money going to build what programs they want to be done. It's a great problem, and it's a political problem, I think. And it points to the need for intergenerational collaboration, like some of what's been going on today. I have no easy answers, but although there are these giant problems, I do have optimism because I get to work with some of the young people. You saw 2 of them today, and talk with alumni like yourselves. So although I've got no easy answers, more conversations like this, but that lead to action, as was said already. We don't just want to be intellectuals sitting around in a room. There got to be points at which you say, okay, we've got enough understanding, there's got to be action now. And a time for that's coming up in the fall. So I hope people will be active. But thank you for involving me. I'm not an economist, so I've been trying, along with a number of students, to start up a PPE minor, philosophy, politics, and economics, which hopefully will go into practice in the fall. Elizabeth Anderson, we read a piece about her. She has a phenomenal PPE program at Michigan. I taught in a program like that in graduate school at Harvard. I think it's a great, what you did today, the conversation showed the kind of emergent quality that I think comes out when aspects of philosophy and normative underpinnings and difficult questions come together with economic policy, and then the question of politics, what's to be done, how are the coalitions to be built. So I would love to have, if you all keep on doing this, please keep me apprised of that. And let me know if there's anything you'd like to do with the Lang Center or with students of ours, because they need opportunities if you have opportunities or internships or things like that to provide. But thanks to all and thanks for Maurice to be bringing me in. Maurice and I have been on the board for a long time together, the Chester Charter Scholars Academy, which was formerly the Chester Charter School for the Arts, which has a whole Maurice Eldridge wing to it. That's how important he's been to that. And so our work goes way back and has my admiration and esteem, and thanks for including me in this.
So let's make it a continuing discussion. So Ben and Zach, Elise, Michael, everyone, thank you for being a part of this, and let's keep it going, okay? Thank you all.
Thanks to all. Have a great day. Stay safe and healthy, yeah.